Recently, news emerged that the United States has decided to block the sale of engines to Turkey for its ambitious fifth-generation fighter aircraft, the Kaan. This sudden move has triggered serious debate, not just in Ankara, but across the global defense community. Why would Washington impose such a restriction on one of its own NATO allies? And more importantly, what will Turkey do now? And how could this reshape future relations between Ankara and Washington? Let's break it down. The U.S. government has blocked export licenses for General Electric F-110 turbofan engines, the very engines intended to power the first production batches of the Kaan fighter jet. For Ankara, this is more than just a setback. It directly challenges the credibility of one of its flagship defense projects. The move traces back to the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, CAATSA, which penalized Turkey for purchasing the Russian-made S-400 missile defense system. Washington viewed that acquisition as a compromise of NATO security, especially because the S-400 could potentially gather data on Western aircraft, such as the F-35. As a result, Turkey was expelled from the F-35 program, and the trust deficit between the two allies deepened. Blocking the F-110 engines is not just about punishing Turkey, it's also about strategic leverage. By withholding such a critical component, Washington ensures it retains influence over Ankara's defense roadmap. In essence, the U.S. is sending a message. Turkey cannot fully chart its own defense future while simultaneously ignoring American security concerns. The impact on Kaan. The Kaan is Turkey's bold attempt to join the exclusive club of nations capable of producing fifth-generation stealth fighters. For Ankara, it is not only a matter of military necessity, but also of national prestige. The aircraft promises stealth features, advanced avionics, and network-centric warfare capabilities that could position Turkey as a leading aerospace power in the Muslim world and beyond. But without engines, even the most sophisticated airframe remains grounded. The American blockade threatens to slow down or even halt the production of Kaan's initial Block 0 and Block 1 variants. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan described the issue as a systemic problem in defense trade between the two countries. He argued that these restrictions will force Turkey to seek alternative strategies, whether through new alliances, parallel technology development, or accelerating its domestic capabilities. Some Turkish officials see the blockade as deliberate sabotage, a way to prevent Turkey from achieving defense independence. Others interpret it as a calculated attempt by Washington to maintain Israel's aerial superiority in the Middle East, something the U.S. has historically prioritized. Turkey's countermove, building its own engine. In the face of these restrictions, Turkey is doubling down on indigenous engine development. Haluk Gorgan, head of Turkey's Presidency of Defense Industries, has made it clear. The future of Kaan will not be tied to any single foreign supplier. The centerpiece of this plan is the TF-35000 engine, a domestically designed turbofan specifically tailored for the Kaan fighter. Ground tests are scheduled to begin in 2026, and if everything stays on track, integration into production aircraft could happen by 2032. Alongside the main power plant, Turkey is also developing the APU-60 auxiliary power unit, further demonstrating its intention to create a fully independent ecosystem. Critics point out that building a modern jet engine is one of the most challenging feats in defense technology. It requires advanced metallurgy, turbine technology, cooling systems, and decades of research. Even nations like China have struggled with engine development despite heavy investment. Turkey, therefore, faces a steep uphill climb. But Ankara has shown resilience before, whether in UAV technology, indigenous armored vehicles, or missile systems, and it is betting that persistence will pay off again. Can Turkey actually succeed? This question is central. Historically, nations that have tried to build independent engine programs have faced enormous delays. China's experience with the WS-10 engine, for example, took decades to mature to the point where it could power frontline fighters. India's Kaveri engine, launched in the 1980s, is still not ready for operational fighter jets. Turkey will almost certainly encounter similar hurdles. Turbine blade technology, heat-resistant materials, and long-term reliability testing cannot be rushed. Even if Turkey manages to produce a working prototype by 2026, refining it into an engine capable of combat readiness will take years, if not longer. However, Turkey does have advantages. It has a growing defense industry ecosystem, strong state support, and an urgent national motivation to succeed. The fact that it already produces engines for UAVs, helicopters, and land platforms shows that the foundations are in place. If Ankara can leverage international partnerships while pushing domestic innovation, the TF-35,000 could become a reality. The short-term workaround. In the meantime, Turkey has already secured some F-110 engines for Kaan prototypes, and these will allow early testing and demonstration flights. For the first few years, Ankara may continue to depend on existing F-110 deliveries while quietly working on alternatives. There's also speculation that Turkey could turn to other partners. For example, it could explore options with the UK's Rolls-Royce, which has previously shown interest in collaboration. Or it might look to Ukraine, which still has expertise in jet engine manufacturing despite the ongoing war. Some analysts even suggest that cooperation with Asian partners, perhaps even China, could be on the table if US restrictions persist. How will America react if Turkey succeeds? This is where the story becomes more interesting. If Turkey manages to develop a reliable indigenous engine and integrate it into the Kaan, Washington's leverage over Ankara would be permanently weakened. For decades, US defense exports have been a key mechanism of influence. Countries that rely on American engines, avionics, or weapons are automatically dependent on Washington's goodwill. A fully independent Kaan, flying with a Turkish-built engine, would mark the beginning of a new era. Ankara would not only have reduced dependence on the US, but also gain the ability to export advanced aircraft to countries that Washington might otherwise block. Nations like Pakistan, Azerbaijan, and even Gulf states could look to Kaan as an affordable alternative to Western fighters. For Washington, this would be a strategic setback. The US has long tried to prevent rivals from gaining access to advanced aircraft technologies. If Turkey bypasses these controls, America might respond in several ways. Tighter sanctions. Washington could impose harsher sanctions under COTSA or new legislation, targeting Turkish defense companies and exports. Diplomatic isolation. The US might limit Turkey's influence within NATO, portraying it as an unreliable partner. Selective engagement. On the other hand, Washington might also try to reconcile with Ankara, offering incentives to prevent Turkey from aligning too closely with Russia, China, or other US rivals. Ultimately, how the US responds will depend on the broader geopolitical climate. If Turkey's independence threatens NATO cohesion, Washington may lean toward punishment. But if Turkey's Kaan program positions it as a counterweight to Russia or Iran, the US could reluctantly accept Ankara's new role. Regional implications. Beyond the U.S.-Turkey rivalry, the Kaan has the potential to alter the regional balance. In the Middle East, a domestically powered Turkish stealth fighter could give Ankara unprecedented influence. In Europe, it would position Turkey as a unique defense supplier outside the traditional Western system. And in Asia, nations that cannot access F-35s might see the Kaan as an alternative. This makes Washington's dilemma even sharper. By blocking engines today, it may be pushing Turkey toward a more independent and potentially more disruptive future tomorrow. Closing thought. The American blockade of Kaan's engines is more than a technical hiccup. It's a reflection of deep strategic mistrust between two NATO allies. For Turkey, the challenge is clear: build independence or remain vulnerable to external pressure. For the US, the question is whether keeping Ankara constrained is worth the long-term cost of alienating it further. If Turkey succeeds in building its own jet engine, it will not only achieve a milestone in aerospace engineering, but also fundamentally change its geopolitical position. What was once a NATO junior partner could emerge as a truly independent defense power. And if that happens, the next chapter in U.S. Turkey relations will be written not in Washington, but in Ankara.